powerful people seem to get away with being powerful. When you hear the amounts of monies that were looted in health in a society such as ours, the helplessness just goes straight inside my bones. And I just think, what is the point?
It's heartbreaking. That's the simple answer. Literally heartbreaking. It's tragedy. It's disappointing. It's inexplicable, but it is explicable because, as you've said, we have seen it coming and we've failed to stop it.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Readiness Report with the Daily Maverick. I'm Redi Tlhabi. So I have a big smile on my face because the person I'm going to be speaking to, or to whom I will be speaking today, is one of my favorite human beings. He's a great South African, an asset, I think, to our society. And his work is all around justice, courage, and what I would call the messy, beautiful business of building a better world. Yeah, it's messy, but it's necessary, it's urgent, and it is beautiful because it can be so rewarding when we inch closer towards the society of our dreams. So he has spent decades challenging power, walking alongside communities, and insisting, I think, that South Africa and humanity can do better. Now, I'm enjoying myself because I know he is blushing. He's probably just red because he doesn't take all these accolades, but that's how I see him. My eyes are very soft when I look at him. Mark Heywood is a writer, he's an activist, he's a provocateur, if you ask me, in the best sense of the word. He's been at the front lines of the struggle for access to health, education, and equality. So, hey, it's so good to speak to you, Mark. How are you doing?
Hi, Redi. And yeah, I was blushing. You couldn't see, but thank you nonetheless for that generous and kind introduction. I appreciate it. I'm good, and it's lovely to spend a few minutes with you.
So I love your blog, and I love how you can't help yourself. You love music. Somehow you just bring that interaction of music and artistic themes to reflect the world that we live in, but also with that sharp and incisive pen of yours. Tell us, what have you been doing? Because I just think, and I'm sorry, I hope you don't mind me saying that, you are just associated with Section 27. When I think about Mark Heywood, I just think about this formidable civil society, social justice organization that I know you didn't build alone. There were so many comrades who worked alongside you. But I think that if we were to reflect on your legacy, Section 27 is amongst them. And of course, the organization that preceded that, the AIDS Law Project, the Treatment Action Campaign. So tell us what's been happening since.
Well, since is actually, funnily enough, 6 years ago. And the world, I think, has changed very fundamentally from when I stood down at Section 27 in 2019 to where we sit here towards the end of 2025. I'm happy to say that Section 27, as an organization that works on the right to health, the right to basic education, the right to food, is alive and well and under very good leadership of a team of women led by Sasha Stevenson. Really, as for me, these days I'm kind of acting as an activist at large, picking and choosing my battles as to what I think is some of the most important things that we need to do in the world, but particularly some of the things where I think there are struggles that we can win and where there's a possibility to raise people's hope and raise people's beliefs in themselves again, that they have rights and dignity as citizens. So, I've spent a lot of time this year working on food and hunger in our country, in South Africa. I mean, the statistics are shocking. 29% of kids by the age of 5 are stunted, physically, cognitively stunted. It's a lost generation. And I decided to kind of pour my energies into trying to help build a new movement around food called the Union Against Hunger, much like the Treatment Action Campaign. But whilst I do things like that, and I think food is something we ought to be able to win on, because everybody needs food. It's essential to dignity. It's the heart of every single human right, and it's as simple as reducing food prices to get food to millions more people. And that's something that I demand that companies like ShopRite, Checkers, and Pick n Pay do, because they're fabulously profitable companies and they can afford to sell food at an affordable price. But it's something that we can win on. And we're living in a time in the world where people, poor people, vulnerable people, migrant people, queer people feel like they are under siege. They feel like they're having all the props that used to protect us in society kicked away by despots all over the world. So, yeah, that's a short resume, but I'm also just thinking a lot, as you've said. I mean, I think that activists like me, what we call civil society, has to really think deeply at this moment about how we try to change the world. Because if we don't think deeply and introspect and do things differently, then we're not going to change the world. And I think at this moment in society, there's kind of a struggle for the soul of humanity that is taking place globally that will shape our worlds for the next 50 years. And we've got to pile in.
We'll talk a little bit more about the moment, the political moment globally, but you spoke about stunting, and I've just remembered something that just last year, this time, around the World Bank IMF spring meetings, I moderated an event that was put together by UNICEF, and it was talking about stunting. And I remember how flabbergasted I was just looking at the statistics that, there has been a 44% decrease in child stunting rates between 1990 and 2022, but a staggering 148 million children worldwide are stunted. And then I thought, this is actually not complicated, because those stats said that if malnutrition and stunting occur in the first 2 years, if malnutrition and stunting occur in the first 2 years of a child's life, the damage is irreversible. So you can't make up, it's irreversible. So rather prevent it. And that this is the stat that just shocked me, if I recall from that conversation. It said that the future income potential of that child is reduced by 10% if stunting occurs. So all I'm saying, I don't want people to get bogged down with statistics. I've also just remembered them because they shocked me so much, is that even if you are selfish, even if you are a hardcore profit-driven person and so on, if a section of your population cannot reach its income potential and that it is reversed by 10%, it has a huge impact on the performance of of companies, on the performance of local economies, and ultimately global economy. So you should care about it, even if you are the most selfish person in the world.
Absolutely. There's a massive social cost. There's a massive economic cost to malnutrition, to reduce productivity, to reduce cognitive ability. As you say, it condemns generations of people to inequality, and inequality is a big buzzword at the moment. And, we have to appeal to people's morals in this very harsh world that we live in, where there are people who would want it to be a dog-eat-dog, or the battle of the survival of the fittest versus the most vulnerable. We've got to appeal to people, including rich and powerful people with consciences, that things can and should be different. And it would be better for them, and it would be better for all of us. I mean, I won't name the individual, but the CEO of South Africa's biggest retail food company earns 80-something million rand a year. That's not right when 10,000 kids a year are dying of malnutrition as the direct or underlying cause of death. 10,000 kids a year. It's not right. And we have to recenter morality and decency in public and corporate conduct.
I'm just also reflecting, and I'm sorry to our viewers that there are a lot of statistics today, but they matter. South Africa is hosting the G20 in the next couple of days. And one of the things, or one of the legacies, I suppose, of the South African presidency of the G20 is that the president commissioned this report by Nobel laureate economist Joseph Stiglitz. Is it Stiglitz? Yeah. And it is on inequality. And one of the things they recommend is that we ought to respond to inequality as a global emergency, the same way we responded to the climate emergency. Why? This report, it was published last week, it says that the richest 1%, the wealthiest 1% of the world increased their wealth by 41% since 2020. 1% richest people increased their wealth by 41% in a space of 5 years. And the bottom 1%, by a minuscule amount. Now, It also said that 83% of countries in the world fit the World Bank definition of unequal society. That's about 90% of the population worldwide. But this is not what was interesting for me. It's not the numbers. It was how the report emphatically states that countries that are defined as unequal in society often see a 7% more regression or reversal of democratic norms. So I thought, hold on. It's a report on inequality, but it's talking to you as well, because if we were to ask people generally, do you consider yourself a Democrat? Not Democrat in the way that the US has Democrats and Republicans, but somebody who believes in democracy. Most people, Mark, would probably say yes. But if you were to start a conversation about the nexus, the link between undemocratic societies and inequality, most people probably are not thinking about it. And I said this when I was moderating at the International Women's Forum last week, because those are a gathering of very formidable women leaders globally who are running international companies like the ones that some of whom we want to do more to reverse inequality. If they were to think about their business practices, their human rights, human resources, their labor practices, the salaries that they pay, if they were to see those in the context of inequality as drivers of inequality, but ultimately to see those practices as actually having an adverse impact on democratic norms, I think we would think about that differently. It's a long-winded way of saying, hey, there's a link between poverty, inequality, and a breakdown of democracy in society, which is not good for business, which is not good for any of us.
So I don't want to repeat what you've just said, Redi. I agree with you 100% on what you've just said. Inequality is not a victimless crime. We used to say that about corruption. We should say it now about inequality. It impacts on every level of society. I've just read a book which I'd recommend to you and other people called Limitarianism. It's written by a woman called Ingrid Robbins, who's a philosopher and development practitioner in the Netherlands, and its subtitle is The Case Against Extreme Wealth. Mm-hmm. And in that book, it's an academic but accessible book, she sets out chapter by chapter, verse by verse, the costs of inequality, the costs of extreme wealth. So extreme wealth has a cost, direct cost for the climate. Extreme wealth has a direct cost for social cohesion. Extreme wealth has a direct cost for democracy. And what's also important is that she shows that this idea that people have deserved their extreme wealth is totally mistaken. Mm-hmm. Because there's very few people in the world who can claim that I became a billionaire because I'm supremely clever. They've made their billions by tax evasion, by evading regulations, by pollution, by all sorts of means. And so we have to get away from this idea that somehow extreme wealth is deserved, that Elon Musk deserves to be close to now being a trillionaire. And it's not that there should not be wealth. It's not even that there should not be some degree of inequality in societies, but it is a question of degree. You know, what is an acceptable degree in terms of human rights, in terms of people's dignity, in terms of functionality of of society, etc. And making these arguments to you, Redi, is not Mark as an extremist speaking or anything. It's Mark as a human being who believes in fundamental human rights and societies that treat people fairly, that regulate properly, that protect the planet, etc. I'd say one last thing on this, because this is a point Ingrid Robbins also makes, is we spend a lot of time talking about poverty and inequality, but we don't talk about the opposite end of poverty, which is this question of extreme wealth and whether it is deserved and what we should do about it. And that's something we face in South Africa, because if you want the epitome of global inequality, it's this city where I'm sitting now in the middle of Johannesburg, where my neighbors sleep in parks every night and don't have any income at all, not because they are stupid or not because they're not capable, but because of circumstances and the society that we live in.
So I just want to talk about that. I mean, last year, the buzz phrase in South Africa was 30 years of democracy. And I just thought, you know what, can we just abandon this kind of poetic language and deal with the reality? Are we the society that we should have been 30 years of democracy with the resources at our disposal? I just know how much work you've done in exposing corruption, speaking out against it, challenging it, speaking truth to power. And I must say that all that work of highlighting corruption as members of the media, civil society, and our allies in government and in business, the whistleblowers and so on, in South Africa, it kind of unlocks a particular process. We had the Zondo Commission. There are a few court cases, but nothing that has been unequivocally demonstrative of, I think, the power of the law and justice, precisely because with corruption, the quality of investigative work, detective work, the political interference, all of that has an impact. The lack of political will, all of that has an impact on the outcome. But I must be honest, Mark, when Mkhwanazi had that press conference in July, I was numb. And then that turned into trauma. And I felt, not this again. But later, with more insights, this is not anything new. It's just a continuation of a pattern. It's just the praxis that we are seeing. And incidentally, just this morning before I spoke to you, a friend of mine sent me a WhatsApp, and I just want to read it I think it articulates the point I'm trying to make here, and wondering how you feel as an activist in this space. So he said, I've weaned myself from the circus. He's talking about the Majanga Commission. I've weaned myself from the circus. Time is invaluable. And I think what he was getting at was around how far we become, the extent to which we become invested in the Majanga Commission and any such forums, which, important as they are, just reinforce this idea that powerful people seem to get away with being powerful. When you hear the amounts of monies that were looted in health in a society such as ours, the helplessness just goes straight inside my bones. And I just think, what is the point? But for someone like you, who was at the forefront, whether it was HIV/AIDS and the denialism of that time and everything that you've worked in, Michael Komape, the boy who drowned in shit in Limpopo in a pit toilet. What does it mean to be here today and following the revelations that we are hearing about today, given where we've been with this story?
Well, it's heartbreaking. That's the simple answer. Literally heartbreaking. It's tragedy. It's disappointing. It's inexplicable, but it is explicable because, as you've said, we have seen it coming and we've failed to stop it. You know, what often leaves me puzzled is political science is a science. And we know enough about political science and history to know where society is going when it goes down particular roads and what the end of that is. So why do we not do more to arrest what is happening before the obvious happens to us? You know what I'm trying to say? I mean, I'm reading Arundhati Roy at the moment about her essays about India and about Modi. And we shouldn't be surprised by Donald Trump, because the playbook has been carried out already by Modi. And Modi shows us what Trump is going to continue to try to do over the next period. And South Africa shows us that if we don't do something to not just deal with the corruption and the criminals, but to deal with the consequences of the corruption and the criminals in the poverty and the hunger and the suffering, then people will lean towards populism. You know, there was an article at the weekend in the Sunday Times by Imran Buckus, you know, pointing out that South Africa is on a road to authoritarianism because we're not addressing this. And you know what surprises me, Redi? I mean, I have great respect for the president in certain respects of what he's been doing over the last few years, but I can't understand why Democrats and constitutionalists can't act decisively on social problems like hunger, like poverty, like the healthcare system, etc. They dilly-dally, leave those problems to fester and get worse, laying the social basis for populism, and then an authoritarian, whether it's Jacob Zuma or Gayton McKenzie or the EFF or Donald Trump, comes along and provides exactly that decisive action that the people think they desire, but then the people soon find out that the decisive action is not in the interests of poor and middle-class people, it's in the interests of themselves. But the civic space has suddenly been shrunk. And now we're all in a much worse place, because not only are we poor, but we don't have a free media, we don't have freedom of expression, we don't have a right to protest. Many more of us are in prison suddenly. That's the trajectory that we have to be aware of and be warned of.
And you know, you've just touched on something, populism, because that's what it does. It exploits a real problem. It rightly puts the spotlight on the establishment that has failed, not just in the US, in South Africa, in Kenya, in Zimbabwe. It puts the spotlight on them, but then it appropriates people's struggles and over-promises.
Totally.
You know, it's just two sides of the same coin when you look at what populism claims to reject and what it does with the power that people give it. And I'm just thinking here that we had what is being called a blue wave, the outcome of multiple elections last week here in the United States. It wasn't just New York, although that is the one that is drawing much attention, precisely because it's a young man. First Muslim mayor of New York. There were questions around Israel, about Jewish voters and all of that. But his message was actually simple. It was about people. It was about the economy. It was about the cost of living. It was about housing, those messages. And so other lessons for us to learn about how we build movements in South Africa that result in obviously the kind of electoral outcomes that we want, keeping in mind that we have a different electoral system, but the kind of people's energy that is far more authoritative than a political party. Mamdani was not endorsed by the wider sections of the democratic establishment. In fact, there are others who can't even say his name. There are others who didn't endorse him, others who wouldn't even say who they voted for. But he did win on that ticket. And I wonder whether there are some lessons for us as South Africans about how much authority we acquiesce or we bequeath to political formations. What does it look like to truly be active citizens in small everyday acts, not just protests or petitions, not just at voting only? How do we really reclaim our agency when institutions are so broken?
Yeah, so this is a time of threat, enormous threat worldwide, and also of opportunity. And I think the Mamdani moment, if you like, shows the opportunity, and that we're down, but we're not necessarily out yet. And I've been thinking a lot about it and trying to think, well, what really do you draw? What do we draw from that? And I think you've partly said it, Redi, is that first of all, Mamdani went to people. He immersed himself in New Yorkers, literally immersed himself in New Yorkers, and not in a fake superficial way, in a genuine way where he listened and talked and shared sorrows, but also shared joys. He revealed himself to be an ordinary human being who likes music and likes sport, a likable human being, not a dogmatist, not an ideologue, somebody that we can relate to. Mamdani was prepared to think at scale. One of the problems of us in civil society is we've reduced ourselves to little defensive campaigns, and we've lost our ambition and boldness to think at scale. A young man, a Muslim, a socialist, prepared to think, I can be mayor of New York, but it wasn't a one-man show. It was a multi-people show. He inspired an engine that worked for him and that carried not just his message, but the message of Democrats and the message of people who believe in social justice and fairness and equality. And then he spoke to the real issues that are capable of resolution. I think Mamdani will do his level best to make housing more affordable, to bring in rent controls. I think he will do his level best around free childcare. I think he will do his level best around free transport and so on. And those are all issues, really, that are begging in Johannesburg, yes, or are begging in Nairobi, or are begging in London, or whatever. We have to organize them around them. I think we have local government elections in Johannesburg across South Africa next year. We should be thinking like that. I think we should be thinking outside of traditional political parties, because although Mamdani nominally is associated with the Democratic Party, as you said, one, the Democratic Party has largely turned its back on him. But secondly, he ran a campaign that wasn't dictated to by the restraints of traditional party politics. So there's so much. But I also fear for Mamdani. I have to say this. I hope he has very good security now, because if he doesn't, then the fate of a Martin Luther King or a Malcolm X or whatever is not impossible for Mamdani, because he is a threat. And he's a threat not because he's an ideologue or he's an extremist. He's a threat precisely because he's an intentional moderate who is determined to get for people what 20 or 50 years ago we all thought we were entitled to, which is just basic safety, dignity, comfortable accommodation, healthcare, childcare, decent schools, etc. There's nothing extreme about that. That's been made extreme. It's not extreme.
And it's been continuing. Hey, Mark, there are institutions that are putting some monitoring, really racist type of approaches to assessing him. He hasn't even started. And then being labeled a jihadist, he's an anti-Semite, and even that question that he was repeatedly asked about Israel. And he gave the most perfect answer. The first country you'll visit when you become a mayor of New York. And others were saying, his opponents were saying Israel. And he's running for mayor of New York. and why is that a requirement? So this is such a very painful time, I think, as a result of Israel's place in American society, in different societies as well, where spaces of rational engagement have closed, where a lifetime of work as Democrats, activists, people who speak truth to power, people who've been maligned in our journey as professionals in different fields, all of that is just undone because we just won't support Israel. It's insane, and I don't think we should tolerate it and we should give in to it. No, but for someone like Mamdani, that can have real consequences in this country that is obsessed with guns, that's obsessed with machismo and power and weapons and militarism. It can have real consequences. And the maligning of him is based on an absolute lie. He's not an anti-Semite. He's not a jihadist. No. But here we are in the United States, and there are some chasms, some cracks that are emerging, even in MAGA, about Israel's influence, undue influence on American politics. So hopefully I don't know. I'm not optimistic that things could change in any dramatic way anytime soon. But there is some pain. There is some pain around how people who support Israel engage with the rest of us if we don't support Israel. And there have been real consequences for people financially, professionally, and for Mamdani being mayor of New York, it could be worse.
Yeah. And what Mamdani showed us, Redi, is that despite billions being thrown against him, despite all of that hatred, that disinformation, that whipping up against him, it is actually possible to cut across it still. I mean, he got in New York, obviously, a substantial number of votes from Jewish people because there's a large Jewish community. When you talk to people face to face, when you're able to step out of the hatred of X and the false whipping up, and you can look a person in the eye and you can have a conversation about right and wrong, I believe most people in this world are still open to right, are still basically good and persuadable and can be shifted from being on the right wing, if you like, to being on the other side of the spectrum. So that's something that we have to learn to do. But the other thing we all have to learn to do is we all have to deeply introspect. Each one of us, there has to be a reckoning. When you look at the genocide in Israel, and I wrote about this in an article recently, you have to
in Gaza,
put aside
genocide in Gaza.
Genocide in Gaza, sorry.
Gaza.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
You have to put aside your political beliefs. You have to put aside your ethnic origin, your prejudices, and you have to look at it as a human and say what is actually going on and how do you characterize what is going on there. And there's no other way to characterize it. And we have no excuses for this. You and me and people who watch it, we have no excuses to get this issue, to be wrong on this issue, because it's played out in front of our eyes. Past genocides did not play out live on television. None of them. This one is doing that. So it's a defining test, I think, of all of our humanness. And we have to refine that humanness.
Mark, I didn't even ask a fraction of the questions that I'd prepared. So I'm going to hold you to something. I'm ambushing you publicly that we schedule another conversation in the next couple of weeks because there's so much more I want to discuss with you. Is that okay?
With pleasure, Redi. I always love talking to you, and I'd like to talk a lot more. There's a lot to talk about in the world.
I want to talk about activism. I really want to talk about how we build civil society.
Please.
And I just want to tell our viewers that you have a hub, JAR, the Justice and Activism Hub, right? People, Practice, and Power. Just very quickly, where can they find this wonderful work that you do and what you write?
Well, the Justice and Activism Hub, I produce a kind of newsletter once a month, which is at the moment just reflections on activism and the world. And as you said, music and art and culture and things that I've come across that I think would be good for other people to read and to talk about. So it's on Substack. It's you'll find it as the Justice and Activism Hub under Mark Heywood. I don't make any great claims for it, really. I love writing, but I don't have enough time to write. And I try to do a lot of what I'm doing, politically and in terms of social justice and human rights under this idea of a hub that brings people together, that connects, that coordinates, that convenes, and so on, and helps us to rethink, helps us to rise to this moment, to the challenges of a better world.
Oh, I love you so much, and thank you. Chat to you soon again.
I love you too. Take care, Redi.
Thank you.
Be safe.
That's a
Bye.
Readiness Report, guys.